What does a flawed human look like? Someone you can't understand their depravity. Maybe to say one is just possessed by a demon is too easy. Maybe lying to yourself because you're not willing enough to accept that there's humans that are capable of beyond grotesque elements, that they can act out on humans or even children. Ottis Toole has been accused of much, some truth with lies mixed in. Ottis has been dead for decades now, but still many go over his cases, trying to pinpoint if what he said was true, because we know much wasn't true. But there is one case that still resonates in crime culture till this day. Even till the day he died, we never received a clear answer from Ottis. Was he the one that took Adam, assaulted him, and removed his head, making two parents publicly have an outcry for years, begging for help, looking for their son? In all, it would take 27 years to have full confidence that Ottis was their son's killer, but it was a hard road to get there, and Ottis didn't help along the way, and some still had their doubts that it was him. But Ottis' story of taking Adam is just one piece of his own long, confusing story. He's the villain every parent fears. He was mentally ill and free to the open world for some time, and we still don't have a true understanding of what he unleashed to people that ran into him at the wrong time, at the wrong place. This is the depravity of Ottis Toole.
It's obvious why Ottis Toole has been a key suspect in the murder of Adam Walsh for 12 years.
So frustrated, nobody's really come forth, and the clues haven't come up with anything substantial.
From a Hollywood mall. His head was found 2 weeks later, 125 miles away, in a canal west of Vero Beach.
Paranoia can convey most anything, and I'm much call a power.
Ottis himself has a very shadowy past. At the end of his life, he's incarcerated, still having many authorities visit him from time to time, picking his mind, asking him about unsolved murders, and if he knew anything about it. Ottis was born towards the end of World War II in 1947 in Florida, a state known and renowned for many serial killers. Ottis had a troubled upbringing, but there's two big stories attached to him when it comes to his history of being a serial killer. The one that most people may know him for, ironically, is his friendship, companionship, simply just lovers, with Henry Lee Lucas. The two claim while driving through America, on highways, back roads, big cities, small towns, they killed hundreds together. But later it was revealed that they really hadn't done that much, and were just claiming many lies to get attention. The worse the story could be portrayed, the more they were treated like prison royalty. But that's not to say they weren't guilty of murdering people. The other side that many people know Ottis for is of a terrible case that became public in the early 80s, that Ottis will always be connected to, when the kidnapping and murder of Adam Walsh would happen on July 27th, 1981. Adam was with his mother. They arrived at the mall early that day in Hollywood, Florida. Adam's mother was there to look at a lamp that was on sale. They park, get out of their car, and walk straight into the mall, entering Sears. When going in, Adam sees a display for the Atari video game system. He wants to look at it. His mother tells him to stay right there at it. She leaves him alone with two other boys that were teens at the kiosk while she goes to find her lamp. It was a fatal decision for Adam. She's gone no more than 3 minutes from Adam. She's not far from him, just 20 to 40 feet away, 3 aisles away. The last thing she sees of Adam is the top of his head. As she goes into the aisles, Adam's looking up at the game, standing there with two other boys, teenagers, but she slips a little deeper into the aisles. One big detail that Adam's parents didn't find out until years later, that a new security guard had come up to the boys, telling them that they were loud, and kicking all 3 of them out. Adam, a 6-year-old, followed the other boys out into the parking lot. Adam, 6 years old, now being yelled at and scared by a security guard, is in the parking lot by himself. This is more than likely where Adam found himself in danger. At this point in the story, it's still not 100% clear what took place, detail by detail, other than Adam is taken. He's lured or grabbed forcefully. A massive search is put together for Adam. No clues, no tips, no face to who took him. At this time in 1981, believe it or not, there really wasn't a clue by law enforcement on how to find a child that was missing or abducted in their own area. When the police show up to the mall, talking to Adam's mother, and John, when he arrives at the mall, the police simply said to the parents that Adam more than likely just walked home, questioning the parents too about Adam's mental health, drug abuse. Adam's parents received more help from friends and family and the local public in the beginning stages, getting a search together to go out and look for Adam. Children being kidnapped really just wasn't well known or studied much at that time. It had happened plenty, but there really wasn't specific departments to handle this. What little was known even about serial killers at that point had only really started in the late 70s, and child serial killers just really weren't thought of, but also is why the case blew up. It set up a chain reaction throughout the news, and eventually finding its way into mainstream media. Just by chance, with a sick twist of fate, almost 2 weeks later, Adam's head was found. It was obvious it had been removed purposely, cut off by what looked to be a large knife, possibly, from what authorities thought, a machete. The face had bruising that had tried to heal itself, swelling, while Adam was still alive, indicating that he had been beaten, which would come up years later in the case. But Adam's body was never found, just the head of the little boy that the whole nation was looking at. It's not even known if Adam's body was left with the head and just happened to be eaten by alligators, or if it was kept somewhere else. Adam's case would stay big and relevant for many years. It would even make its way to the hands of Jeffrey Dahmer. For a particular reason, Dahmer was asked directly if he had took Adam. Dahmer had ties to Florida around the same time Adam was taken, and authorities simply took a shot in the dark asking, did he take Adam? Dahmer swore that he had nothing to do with the boy's disappearance, and there was no reason to not believe Dahmer. He's one of few serial killers that were open and honest and shared more than enough information about their cases. Before Ottis is connected to Adam, the case would become so big, it found its way right into Hollywood. In 1983, a movie made for TV would be put together. It would air on television for 38 million people who would tune in to see the story that was still unsolved at the time, bringing more eyes to the case. It captured the moment from start to what they knew at the time of what happened to Adam. What is interesting about this now is before Ottis was ever even connected to the case. You have to understand that Adam's parents went years without fully knowing what happened to him. Their first son, their firstborn. But Ottis would never go to jail for taking Adam. He'll end up in prison for something other than murder. Growing up in Florida, Ottis's life somewhat resembled that of Albert Fish, the child cannibal himself, who is said to have eaten 100 children. When Ottis was a young adult, coming right out of his teenage years, he would lure young men out of bathhouses, bringing them to a location, an abandoned house or his home, where he would tie them up, keeping them for days, assaulting them day and night. Some he says he murdered, but most he let go, dropping them in an alley in the city. In the 70s, crimes like this were just not reported. Victims would never dare come forth. Ottis's life as a normal citizen didn't look the same as anybody else. He didn't have a 9-to-5 job, a retirement plan, family. He simply did odd jobs for handfuls of money, here and there, while committing petty crimes. He would walk the inner streets at night, looking for an opportunity. And like most serial killers, Ottis, he doesn't have sympathy. But unlike most serial killers, Ottis is mentally incompetent. It's hard to pinpoint what Ottis has actually done. When he was arrested, it was for setting properties on fire, the house of a former lover of his. He became furious with his ex, the man he said he had once loved, so he tried to murder him while he was in his home. He admits in many interviews that he has a pyro obsession. It's not the first time he's burned down a home. Ottis had a slew of prior arrests, showing that he was a danger to the public. But it wasn't until Henry was caught with a gun and arrested himself to where Ottis would become considered a serial killer. The two started to give wild stories of killing hundreds of people while traveling through the United States, even taking pictures with each other. But soon it was proven what looked like 100 murders really was less than a handful. There's hours upon hours of Ottis talking to people about murders, cannibalism, digging up graves and pulling corpses out of their caskets and assaulting the bodies, even going into detail about this. But with these ramblings of Ottis, there's holes in his stories, and could be said that they're just the ramblings of an insane man. We do know that Ottis had murdered people in his life, but the times that Ottis did admit to murdering people, most of the time he would take it back, and it wasn't as simple as Ottis saying that he found a person, murdered them, and left them in this certain location. Ottis spoke in many riddles, rambled, he talked in circles, and sometimes had a conversation with himself in the middle of an interview. But it's also at this time that Ottis gets connected with Adam Walsh. It's still unbelievable that if it was Ottis that took Adam from the mall parking lot that day, it's hard to imagine it was so simple and easy that Ottis pulled it off. No witnesses. But then again, this might be something he had done many times before in the past. When Ottis becomes the main suspect in the case, it completely shadows anything that Ottis might be connected to from the past. Everyone's now wanting to know, is Ottis the one that took the little boy Adam that the whole world knows about? But it will take more time than people can even imagine to finding any evidence with Adam and Ottis together. In this era of solving crimes, confession was everything. DNA was not in the mix yet, and cameras were really nowhere to be seen. When the first confession is made about Adam from Ottis, it's met much after Ottis confesses to his so-called killing spree with his lover Henry Lucas. It's said that Ottis was crying in this one particular interview the first time he admits to taking Adam. He didn't go into detail, but just said that he took him. But with these interviews, there's one where Ottis says that he never murdered any children, but then in another interview, Ottis talks about taking children and cooking them over a fire while they're on a skewer using a baseball bat and eating them with hot sauce. Now this could be a hint to Ottis talking about Adam, or just the ramblings and fantasies of Ottis himself. There is one story though that has been confirmed about Ottis and Adam. A story would emerge about Ottis from his own family, where Ottis confesses to taking Adam. After the murder of Adam, as the world learns about who Adam is through the television and radio, Ottis is still free for some time. One night, he was sitting around a campfire with his family and drinking heavily. Ottis becomes extremely intoxicated. He starts to go into detail about a story that he thought was funny, making him laugh. Ottis tells his family members around him in a drunken, mumbling state that he took the little boy Adam, assaulted him, and cut up his body, throwing it in different places. Even one of the family members that heard this ran off and started to vomit, which it said it made Ottis laugh even harder. The story stayed with the family that heard it until Ottis was connected to any of this. When Ottis admits to the murder of Adam again, he goes into more detail. He says when he was in Florida that day, he was looking for a child to take, calmly and peacefully, with no one seeing. He wanted to take the child back to Jacksonville, where he was living, wanting to raise the child himself, but saying he did find a little boy alone, down in the south of Florida. But it went wrong. The boy said his name was Adam. Ottis told the detective he didn't know anybody knew about it until he saw that it made the headlines on the news. When authorities tell the Walshes what Ottis had told them, what he had done to Adam, it said that John Walsh ran to the toilet and threw up while crying, screaming. Adam's mother laid on the floor yelling in pain. Even years after the murder of Adam, at this point, it's still hurting to know what their little boy had went through. It wasn't enough that Adam could have just suffered an easy death. It was the fact that it was beyond anyone's worst nightmare of how Adam died, beaten, tortured, mentally and physically, and ripped apart. How Ottis' life would end up being spent in prison was of 4 big events that happened, one by one, In 1982, Ottis set a house on fire with an old man inside of it. Ottis had barricaded the old man inside, so he couldn't escape. The man survived at the moment, but later, 1 week to that day, he passed away. Ottis is the key suspect in the case. 1 year later, Ottis has the fight with his boyfriend, setting his home on fire. Ottis is arrested and confesses to what he's done and sentenced to death by a jury. And even later that year, he is found guilty of murdering a 19-year-old girl. The third event was that of when Lucas was arrested in 1983, where he started his famous confession of killing over 1,000 people with Ottis, who he said he had met in a soup kitchen. Lucas claimed that they were both in a cult called the Hands of Death, but as the famous story that's been told many times before of Lucas, it was proven to be all made up. Even eventually Ottis broke, making up confessions himself, hoping to get something from it. Ottis would eventually be sent to Florida State Prison. In that time, Ottis is living out his life on death row, even living right next to Ted Bundy. As Ottis is in prison over the years, he's not the confirmed murderer of Adam, even though he has confessed to it multiple times and then retract his confession. The case of Adam would really just disappear in lost time. Ottis simply just doesn't care about the attributes of the case, but detectives are still paying attention to Ottis and still linking him to other murders. Ottis would be interviewed many times over the years, detectives asking him about old Jane Does. Psychologists would study him, trying to understand why Ottis was the way he was. Like many prisoners, Ottis finds love throughout the years, just someone to talk to, have contact with. But Ottis is forgotten about and dies in prison. In 1996, at the age of 49, he died of cirrhosis. But as Ottis is lying in bed, in pain, waiting to die, he has family that comes to see him. Ottis's niece is by his bedside at the end. It's at this moment that with little strength, once again, Ottis confesses to the murder of Adam once again to his niece. With this, the niece of Ottis would find the Walshes and tell them what her uncle had told her as he was dying. It's just another little piece of evidence that's believed to be true. But time moves on once again, and it seems like the story is over, but it isn't just quite. When Ottis was arrested for the last time and sent to prison, his car was also taken by authorities. They find one big key piece of evidence in the case with Adam, maybe the biggest. They find a machete right in the trunk of Ottis's car. It's a large knife, just like the one that was on the autopsy report that was said to be used on Adam to remove his head. And also, an luminol test had been done on the car, the floorboard particularly. They sprayed the whole car. They find blood spatter, mostly in the front of the vehicle, and with the large amounts they find, they cut out the carpet of the floorboard. When the pictures come back of the luminol test, it's seen that there's massive amounts of blood in the car, particularly on the passenger side floorboard. What authorities believe they see with this picture is a face looking back at them. They say they believe this is the face of Adam. Whether it was before or after Ottis had decapitated Adam, it's never really known, because Ottis said he had beat the boy, causing blood to the face, but then obviously decapitating him, causing massive amounts of blood as well. 27 years after Adam's death, and 12 years after Ottis dies, police name Ottis the killer of Adam Walsh. The Walshes themselves are happy with the call. They believe Ottis was the one that took Adam that day. They always had. Many people believe that Ottis did take Adam, but there's also many that don't, and they simply believe that the luminol test wasn't that believable. A case that's been closed, but still heavily open to the public when it comes to the belief of who the real murderer was. Was it Ottis, or was it someone else?